All right, Ingram Smith, Bud Elliott, back again for another episode of the Nolecast, Bud's second podcast in a week. We've got some nice listener questions to get to, a couple things to point out on the recruiting trail, and then kind of a follow-up conversation from what we had last, or I guess earlier in the week regarding projected records, Mike Norvell's job security, what, if anything, can be gleaned by the decision to move on from Mike Martin Jr. So, as always, we'll thank the people that make the Nolecast possible. Tarpon Cellars Wine Company, tarponcellars.com. Coupon code Nolecast, 20% off on any purchase there used. Thank you again, the broader listenership, for the support that you've shown those guys. Been fantastic with some particular great feedback recently. So, Bud, we get to add a name to the 2022 class, which at this point I had kind of written off, particularly adding any more high school kids. But you get a big body athletic kid in Io Tiafase, previously 23, reclassified to 22, about a 300-pound defensive lineman out of Maryland. A lot of excitement here. You know, you beat Arkansas, which is a team that's got a significant amount of juice on the trail with how they've done, and Sam Pittman's general response from the college football world right now. This is, look, we're not going to, shoot off banners and fireworks for a three-star kid committing, but this is a really nice piece and one of the final pieces, it looks like, for the class of 2022.
Yeah, Ingram, I'm excited about this one for a couple of reasons. One, I think he does have a decent bit of potential as a player. A guy who had reclassed to 23 and maybe back to 22 now. He's going to be enrolling, as you said, in the summer. But it's another college-ready body, and the FSU is already pretty excited about what it has at defensive tackle from this 22 class. Right, you get Daniel Lyons. You get Bishop Thomas. They're very excited about Lyons. They also think Thomas has some upside. Io is going to get to practice all this fall. He just can't play in games because he's going to be taking an academic red shirt because he doesn't have enough credits to play in the fall. It's kind of one of those decisions like, hey, would you rather go like JUCO or old school prep for a year, or would you rather just get on campus, start getting developed, knowing that you're not actually going to be able to play in games? Even if he wasn't redshirting, I don't think he'd be able to play. Or if he wasn't academic redshirting, I think there's a pretty good chance he would be regular redshirting, considering that they do have, Lovett and Cooper and Briggs who can slide inside, and Malcolm Ray and those, and Josh Farmer and those guys. So I think this is another good get. I also like it from your standpoint of you're able to evaluate your room better with a full year under their belt of all three of these guys. I like getting Io in better now than I would if he was a 23 potentially, just because of the evaluation standpoint, right? That sounds pretty good to me. I think they should be pretty happy about this one.
Really nice pickup. A lot of kind of prospect to work with there. I'm more excited about this than necessarily his star ranking would lead you to believe on initial feedback. Really impressive kid, if that matters to you guys as far as the way he carries himself. Conversation. I think there's a lot of good things in store for Io, and I think Florida State's fortunate to get him. So nice little positive note to start off the podcast with. And we may have one more name in the 2022 class, but you can get pretty close to putting your final notes on that and get a good idea as to where Florida State stands with a class, like you said, that they think they already had a little bit of success when it comes to the defensive line. So nice pickup there. We'll move here to conversation that we had on the previous podcast about potential records, if that would what it would need to be for Mike Norvell's job security to really be brought into line. Since I think the day after we recorded, they fired Mike Martin Jr., the former baseball coach. So, maybe that gives perspective. Maybe it doesn't. I think some people have kind of tried to group and link some things in here that I'm not sure are relevant with the conversation. But why don't
link.
we?
Are
yes,
you,
exactly. That was not intentional, but we'll go with it. So let's have our conversation here about what, if any of us, takes away from Mike Martin being let go in the window of time that he was.
I mean, look, I asked some people about this. I don't follow college baseball a ton. We don't talk a ton of college baseball on this show. FSU fans do seem to like college baseball, but we don't usually get questions or like people asking a lot of baseball questions or requests for us to talk more baseball. I don't know. I wasn't going to do an emergency show for Martin Jr., but maybe we should have. I don't know. I asked about this, and I specifically said, hey, and this is a fairly big booster that I asked about this. I said, do you think that Mike Alford, the new athletic director, pulling the trigger on Mike Martin Jr. when he did after only 2 seasons is indicative of a willingness to move quickly if things don't work well for Norvell this year? Stemming obviously from the conversation that you and I had last episode, as you noted. And what he said was, no, they were going to lose a lot of guys to the transfer portal because they didn't want to play for him anymore. So it had to be done, which maybe suggests to me that this would not have necessarily been done if that was not going to happen. It's interesting.
It is interesting. I am very hesitant to make too much of this. I'll put it that way. This is a specific situation where you can fire a coach that was making $400,000 and maybe go hire a coach to make 1.2. That those aren't the economics
Right.
of football. It's a totally different situation. And look, I'm the guy who actively has to edit myself from stop talking about soccer on this podcast because it's not what you, the listener, deserve. If you sign up and listen to a Florida State football podcast, you don't need one of the co-hosts entertaining himself with soccer talk. But I really would not bring anything into the conversation of this with Kevorkian. Look, you offered to make that guy the highest paid coach in the industry. He didn't take it. That's not something that a whole lot of boosters are even going to give more thought than that to it. So I certainly don't think Mike Alford's, making decisions on baseball and football based off the fact that the soccer coach left after you offered to make him the highest paid position in the industry, which is to the boosters that I talked to about their understanding of that situation. And after that, they don't have a whole lot. So I don't blame people. Obviously, we're dealing with the first real athletic director that this university's had for 12 or 15 years, and people want to make, extrapolations off of that and off of what they have as a sample size to make a judgment off of. But I'm real hesitant to try to group any of this, and it's not going to change my opinion whatsoever as to what I said. I think it's a totally different situation. The financials are on a scale that is not particularly that I think anything could be taken away from watching how the baseball program was handled. So I'm kind of where I was last week as far as a record and what may transpire. Doesn't sound like you're necessarily moved all that much either. But hey, it's nice to have an athletic director that feels free to make the decisions that he does and is obviously wanting to move the baseball program in a different direction.
So the other aspect of this is that I agree with you. It is nice to have somebody who, if he diagnoses a situation, which is a lot of kids might hit the transfer portal, that he's willing to make the move because he doesn't think that they can pull out of the tailspin. And I think that's probably an accurate assessment. The other part here, though, is baseball clearly has a candidate lined up that they want in Link Jarrett, Notre Dame's current head coach, who they're still in the College World Series, and they just beat Tennessee, probably the most obnoxious baseball team of all time, I think. You can't just turn around and tell the umpire you're effing terrible twice in a row and not think you're going to get tossed, even though the umpire's calls were pretty sketchy. So they went into Knoxville and beat those guys. And they also have some pretty good backup options, right? I mean, granted, one just got hired by Clemson, but I think that guy would have been a backup option on the list as well. And FSU is I think a somewhat attractive baseball job in the national scene, although it will depend on how much money FSU wants to invest in baseball, because clearly, they are not replicating the experience that the SEC teams are. SEC teams are making baseball a true event, right? You look in the outfield, you got people doing keg stands and just having a good old time. They're actively tailgating in the outfield, et cetera, et cetera. It just looks like a huge party. FSU is really kind of screwed because of where Hauser is, I think, as far as ability to make changes and do that. You really can't set up parties in the road. Although I guess, if you wanted to, you could just take down the fence and right and just block it off. But that's a lot of times per year to block off a fairly major road on campus. So I don't think they would do that. But if you're willing to invest in baseball, and I think long term, baseball is a better fit if you had to pick a number 2 sport to invest in than basketball is. I think for Tallahassee, but maybe I'm wrong. But if people have the perception that you're going to invest in baseball, you should be able to hire a pretty good candidate. But part of the reason why you make the baseball move is because you do have that candidate out there. And clearly, if Notre Dame's going to make a run, Lake Jarrett is either going to get really paid, either by Notre Dame or by Clemson, who just hired Michigan's coach Bakich, as I mentioned. There was some urgency there, I think, to make the move to try and go get somebody like that. I don't know who that guy is in football. Like, is there a real obvious guy? And don't tell me Dion. Like, I've already, no, come on, be real here. Is there an obvious guy in football that Mike Alford says, hey, we have to go get this guy if Norvell and company were to go 5-7? To me, there's not somebody that is super obvious.
No, I mean, not at this time.
I mean, I'm not going to play like here. Let's go down the candidate list if we had to have a candidate list ready. But
well, if you get a crack at Bob Stoops, I mean, maybe you do it.
Well, yeah. But, I mean,
it's sarcasm for those that aren't previously familiar with me.
Do you remember that?
Being an ass. Do I remember what that whole
all that
scenario?
Just people claiming
pretty well, bud. I do.
Everybody got sources out of nowhere, and they were all okay.
I do remember
Bob
that.
Stoops.
That was a fun time.
I think some people who do have sources who knew it wasn't going to happen still went with it and just made stuff up.
I do think there was some of that too. Yeah. Funny days. So another thing here, and we have some listener questions on it, and I got some feedback on Twitter and email. By no means of me talking about 5-7 potentially bringing an end to Mike Norvell's time. That's not me predicting what's going to transpire. The other voice that you hear on this podcast is like a legitimate gambling expert, and I would listen to him before you would me when it comes to stuff like this. But what Florida State's over under 6.5 currently?
It's 6.5, 7, 7.5, depending on where you look and the different juice out there. Actually, hold on. I have imports going on in my spreadsheet here, so I'll just go ahead and expand this. All right, DraftKings 6.5 even money. We got Bet Online, which is an offshore 6.5, 130 to the over. FanDuel 6.5. Caesars is hanging 7, 130 to the over. PointsBet, by the way, which is not in all states, but if you guys really feel kind of more bearish on this team, they're hanging 7.5, 125 to the under. I don't know what Barstool's got a weird juice number. They're 6.5, 175 to the over. So that basically reads like 7 and 115. So your number is kind of, I would say your number is like 6.8 ish right now in the offshores. You can call it 7 because most places are not giving you 6.5 with flat juice. But yeah, it's like 7.
I currently like Florida State to hit 7, and at this point in time, I think they're closer to 8 than they are 6. I'm fairly optimistic about what next year looks like. It's not me this is not a prognostication as to what's going to happen. It's more just me talking about what could occur if you have a season where you basically recruiting's dead and you're, forced into looking at what the ramifications of an early signing day period are and going away and signing or going ahead and, I don't want to say giving up on the 2024 class, but would certainly put you in a position to have a tough road there for success.
So, I have them currently at 7.09.
Okay.
Just expand it out. So yeah, I mean, like I'm not going to be betting the over or the under there based on a half point. I will also note that I have them as a single digit spread in 9 of 12 games. So a lot of stuff can happen there.
Yeah.
I mean, you could go 7-2 in those, and all of a sudden ooh, okay, like you're doing something. You could go, 3-6 in those. And that ain't so great.
We'll just have to see. Obviously, a conversation that will play itself out in time, and we're not in a rush to crown Mike Norvell as a guy that's going to get a 5-year extension after this year, or somebody that's going to be let go. But interesting series of circumstances, ramifications that could transpire, and whether or not you have a coach on a hot seat will be probably dictated by the first 5 games of the season or so. One thing that we don't need any more evidence or data points on to know is that we have been fortunate enough to pair with 2 absolute legends in the home loan industry. Chad and Shannon have been nothing but first class for Bud and his 2 personal interactions with him. Nothing but fantastic feedback on I believe we're at 411, somewhere in that area loosely, as to either original mortgages or refis. Certainly, the market has changed over the last 3 or 4 months, and it's a different process of going through and trying to find where you're eligible, what's possible for you. And there's nobody better to walk you through that process than Shannon, a guy that is as responsive as anybody out there. Truly a 5-star mortgage broker. Shannon's fantastic. Shannon is the Dalvin Cook of his industry, as we are wont and fond of saying. And a big thanks to those guys for making the Nolecast possible.
No doubt about it. Awesome supporters of us. Really appreciate you guys supporting them. If right now is the time for you to get a loan or a refi, definitely call that number 844 FSU loan. It's 844 FSU loan. And I want to talk a little dominoes, not the pizza, but quarterback dominoes here. If you saw the announcement, man, so Jaden Rashada, who's one of the top quarterbacks in the country out of California, he is announcing on CBS HQ, which is, of course, my employer. So he's pushing his date back just a couple days to early next week. And I'm excited to see where he goes. And I really kind of feel that almost wherever he picks will have some implications for FSU's quarterback recruitment process. If you guys are new to the show or just don't follow recruiting a lot in the offseason, trust me, I will tie this back to FSU. FSU currently has a commit from 3-star quarterback Chris Parson, who is out of Tennessee. And they have also recently offered Brock Glenn and Ricky Collins. And they're monitoring a quarterback named Emory Williams out of Milton High School there in the Panhandle. Some schools really like him. Other schools are not as sold. So let's run through some of these scenarios, because so he has a final 5. A&M, Miami, LSU, Ole Miss, and Florida. I was told Ole Miss is not going to be the pick. Like they're out. So to me, it's really a 4. I also don't really feel the need to include Ole Miss, because that one might actually not have real implications for FSU's quarterback recruiting. But so if A&M misses, I think it's interesting to discuss what they do and what that might impact FSU's quarterback recruiting.
Well, yeah, it's interesting. The 3 different schools here that you have listed, 4 different, if you include UF. A&M already had I don't want to say has flirted, but certainly has looked at Glenn, the kid out of the Memphis area there. If Miami misses, do they reevaluate where they are with the kid Williams that you just mentioned? If LSU misses, do they look 3 miles down the street and recruit the local prospect? I think this is a good thing to bring up, not just pimping an announcement on your network, but it will certainly have, has the potential to have larger ramifications for Florida State, and may bring a school or 2 in which they would, I don't want to say struggle against, but it would certainly be a more formal level of competition should some of these schools decide to focus or make an emphasis on one of these prospects if Rashada does not, in fact, go their way.
Yeah, I think that's fair. FSU's quarterback recruiting is going to get clarified quite a bit over the next month. Obviously, they still have Parson. We'll see, how hard after Parson is Mississippi State, right? Like, do they want him badly? I don't know that, man. I was it on
Yeah.
our group chat that this came up?
I have some skepticism around that as well. That's a true, legitimate quarterback offer. I mean, that's what I've heard from some people in the industry that I tend to point stock in or put stock in what they tell me. And look, I'm not trying to bag on a kid. He's going to get a quarterback spot somewhere. Absolutely. I'm just not sure that that's a true uh, SEC West quarterback offer from Parson and his relationship at Miss State.
For sure. All right. So I'm interested in what happens with Emory Williams because I have heard from some coaches in college who really like this kid. A lot of my buddies who are G5 coaches are really hoping that like Miami and UF don't offer this guy. And now FSU is entering the picture potentially as well. He might end up being really good. He actually, I think, got the final or penultimate spot in the Elite 11 final. So when I go out there to LA next week, or well, 2 weeks now, uh, well, like 10 days. All right, let's just call it 10 days. Fine. When I go out there to LA in 10 days, I'm going to get to see Chris Parson. I'm going to get to see Brock Glenn. I'm going to get to see Emory Williams, and I'm going to get to see Ricky Collins all side by side. So I will have a much better feel for how these guys compare, seeing them side by side than I otherwise would. So I'm pretty excited about that. I'm trying to figure out like what the best situation here is for FSU as far as where Rashada goes.
I think it's that he goes to A&M personally.
I think that's possible. Yeah. But so, okay. If he goes to A&M, that means Miami misses. Miami's backup, we think, is Emory Williams. They're the one school on this list that got him on campus, worked him out, seemed to like him quite a bit. If they offered, it's kind of one of those, hey, like you got an offer, but let's understand, like our we're not necessarily pushing for you right this second type thing. I think. Florida, I don't know who their backup plan is, to be honest. They were also in on Vizina, who they missed and went to the Clemson. Their fans are just furious right now, by the way. They missed on Harris, who just went to Georgia, and I think they expected Billy Napier Company to start crushing recruiting immediately. And I think they are doing much better than Dan Mullen did, and they're starting to build some relationships. But kids don't necessarily know who Billy Napier is. Right? Like he was there at Louisiana for
same thing we've talked about with Mike Norvell. Absolutely.
Yeah, exactly. So some of the guys on his staff, they do know who they are. And I think they're connecting with kids fine. They have some new staff buzz, but I don't know that new staff buzz is getting them over that Georgia, Bama, to some extent, obviously, Clemson hump quite yet. So if Florida misses, they're kind of a wild card here. I'm not really sure what they would do. If A&M misses, okay, I'm going to agree with you. That's the best, obviously, for FSU's quarterback recruiting. Also, you don't want Miami to get a potential 5-star kid since you play them. I'll play devil's advocate here, I guess, for a second if I can, because I can agree with you. I think A&M is the best landing spot for Rashada for domino effect QB recruiting for the Noles. If Miami gets him, obviously you're going to have to play him, which you don't really want to do, but you're trying to get good players too, and you just hope yours are better than theirs. Is Brock Glenn assured that he wants to go to A&M if that happens? A&M just got Connor Wegman, who they really apparently like. They still have Haynes King on the roster, who is I think like a double redshirt freshman because he was hurt last year after 2 games and also had the COVID year. So you got that going on. And they also have Max Johnson, who is only a 3rd-year guy.
That's true. I forget.
Connor Wegman was a top 5 guy.
Yeah, I forget Johnson's got more eligibility than I originally thought.
That's a loaded room, man. So like, I'm not really guaranteed that he would go there. I don't know who Florida would go in on. It also leaves like the Emory Williams door open for you a little bit if Miami does get Rashada. You know what I'm saying? And that kid might turn out to be the best of these guys. I mean, we've seen some of these kids in person. We haven't seen all these kids in person. I think going to the Elite 11 will help us out quite a bit. So it might leave more options open, but clearly you're correct because my option is that Miami gets a potential 5-star QB. So that's not what we want.
Well, and
If you're an old
we
fan.
we didn't talk as much about LSU here. I mean, I don't know that they immediately go to Collins, but I'll be interested in your opinion after Elite 11. Of the kids that we've talked about, Collins is probably my favorite of the four at this moment. At least, in my opinion, what he projects to, what he's got the ability to turn into with time. Um, yeah, I don't know at what point if LSU starts to just look down the road rather than trying to grab quarterbacks elsewhere. But maybe I would have one be in this kid choosing LSU and LSU having their quarterback, and knowing that you can go and spend all this time and resources in Baton Rouge and not ultimately lose it because a last minute LSU offer comes in. So,
And that's an interesting one to me because if you're going to win that, like if LSU does start pressing for him, I think you have to go negative a little bit and say, hey, Walker Howard is Brian Kelly's guy. Like Walker Howard was probably going to flip to the Irish when Orgeron got fired at LSU because Kelly was recruiting him so well. When Kelly went to LSU, obviously, it was like the staff he liked the most, who loved him the most, is all of a sudden at the school that he wanted to stay at because Walker Howard was a Louisiana guy. And I think the pitch there is like, do you really think you're going to beat out Walker Howard when Walker has a year in the system and was clearly like Kelly's number one pick last year? I don't know. Maybe. But that could be kind of hard. Again, I really don't know what Florida's backup plan is at this point. They could throw a wrench in things, certainly. But it's not like a whole lot of big-time quarterbacks have played for Napier, right?
yeah. So something to consider, something we'll watch play out, get a better idea, and then your time out at camp will certainly give us a better feel for the prospects themselves.
One thing I got a little text. Hakeem Williams is going to come up for another visit this summer. So that's good news, right? I mean, I think everybody thinks A&M is in the driver's seat there, but you're also battling Georgia and Pitt. So Pitt's kind of an interesting name there. I guess Miami technically, but I don't really think they're going to get I don't think Miami's going to get Williams.
Yeah. Williams is a big-time receiver out of South Florida. A&M's got Coley and Craig recruiting him, so they certainly know those roads and how to recruit that area. Georgia with Brian McClendon and some of their staff. It'll be a tough battle, but I'm not trying to throw a ton of optimism at people, but I have my concerns about wide receiver recruiting long term. But they're doing a little bit better in 2023 than maybe I would have given them credit for 2 weeks ago or so. It's there's maybe a little bit more there than I would have thought at first glance. So something to keep in the back of your mind and see how that plays out.
I agree. I agree with you on that. In that, I think they are doing better with their top prospects than some people realize. But there is no prize for second place. Now, as I said, I've got them projected at 7 wins. They could go 9-3. They could go 5-7, right? Both of those are just +2 to where I think a fair average is. If they go 9-3, that's some decent wins, at least by name on that schedule. Then maybe they're in that. One guy I think I would offer, though, I think Micah Mays is a pretty good player at the Benjamin School down there in South Florida. I've seen him play 7 on a number of times. I think we talked about him maybe 2 or 3 episodes ago. He does track. Obviously, it's 1A. Benjamin School is not real big. But I think Micah Mays is a good player. I know Wake Forest loves Micah Mays, and I kind of trust what Wake Forest does with receivers. If you've seen like the last, 5 years under this staff, I think he's a good player and somebody they should probably offer. They're obviously in on Andy Jean to some extent. And William Fowles is another name to know at receiver, but I think Micah Mays is a guy who they should offer. But
so we'll look real quickly. We talked about Ayo Tafase at the beginning of the podcast being one of the final pieces of the 2022 class. If there is one more piece to be made, but it certainly appears as though it would be a decision that would involve either Damon David, the defensive back out of Oregon that has visited, or the Turntine kid out of South Carolina that we've talked a couple times about. Now, Turntine, we expressed, I think, skepticism appropriately early. Not necessarily skepticism, but some concern that, hey, you're not just getting a kid that had 11 starts at South Carolina or something like that. There's a little bit more of a layer to the story. To be fair to the kid, showed up in much better shape than some of the kind of sloppy body composition comments that I had gotten from people in the SEC and as far as thoughts about him. But would you agree that, a final edition certainly seems to be down to one of these two kids? Perhaps you give a walk on a scholarship here, but to me, it'll either be David or Turrentine with probably about a 90% probability.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, the only real wrench we could throw in this process is there a JUCO out there? And look, full disclosure, I don't know of anybody. Okay, I'm just saying this could happen in theory because it does happen sometimes. Is there a JUCO out there who manages to get done a lot more classes than we're anticipating, and all of a sudden, instead of becoming a 23 prospect, there's a JUCO who, hey, surprise, I'm a 22 now, right? That's the only real other option, but I think it would be either David, the DB out of Oregon, or Turntine. Yeah.
So one final thing for we listener questions. This is really more just a response to some social media and Patreon messages and email messages we've received. I want it to be clear. It's kind of joking, kind of serious, that I have no ability to get anyone into the College Hall of Fame more than just a one-time off with Marvin Jones last year. That was nice. It was cool that we were able to predict it literally a year ahead of time after some people that I talked to. I think it's fantastic that Janikowski, Dunn, and Peter Warwick are candidates. Ultimately, I think all three will get in time. I think Dunn may be the first just because of his appeal with media members and the perception of all the things he's done, both in career and out. But yeah, the Marvin Jones, hey, I think you guys might have missed this one. You need to give it strong consideration. Is a bullet that I can only fire one time before I'm told to just blank off and never give comments on the subject matter again. So
hopefully there's not that many big misses left. Right.
Yeah.
I mean, I know there always are some, but I get to go to the College Football Hall of Fame pretty soon, by the way, man. I've never been.
Nice.
And I'm excited to go.
It's lovely. Wall of Helmets is really cool. It is.
We're not doing well, there's still some remnants of COVID restrictions that I think will be fully rid of by next year. So we'll probably resume doing more of the in-person, employee meetups. But I'm going to go to SEC and ACC to meet with all of our guys who have to go to SEC Media Days and ACC Media Days. And SEC Media Days is held there in Atlanta at the College Ball Hall of Fame. And I got a hotel that's walking distance, so I don't have to worry about that downtown parking.
There you go. Well done.
Nice. Although walking distance in July in Atlanta, I feel like, is there any distance that you really want to be walking? I don't know.
It's very limited. Very limited.
Yeah. Quick opponent note here. A lot of times I think FSU fans and all fans are a little bit myopic and, well, woe is us. Only we would have a top transfer receiver and one of our most important players get hurt, right? With Winston Wright, obviously in the car accident with the brutal leg injury. I mean, he's tweeting like he's going to be back. I'll believe it when I see it that he's not just back, but back and what you need him to be. And what you needed him to be was your number one receiver. And I believe he would have been your best receiver by a mile if he had been healthy on the team. I don't think you're going to get that now, at least not for this year. However, I did start our crowdsourced offseason injury thread on Twitter, which is just something for wagering purposes. Good to remind yourself who got hurt or who got ruled ineligible. And one actually is a person at FSU plays. Boston College, unfortunately, Christian Mahogany, who was one of the top 3 or 4 offensive linemen for centers and guards on the early NFL draft boards. He's out for the year with a torn ACL. Twitter rumor there is done playing pickup basketball. But this is fairly relevant because Boston College does come to Tallahassee, the 5th week of the year, I think? Is that right?
Yeah,
Just have the schedule
they're either
memorized by this
game
point, I feel
5 or
like.
6. But yeah.
Game 4, actually,
Oh, 4.
after
Okay.
after Louisville. All right, so Boston College comes to town after Louisville 8 days later. Boston College now returns 0 offensive line starters. They had already missed 4, who I think they had 2 or 3 draft picks, and now they return 0. Now look, they get Jakovic back, but and they had some offensive linemen who were hurt last year. But FSU really abused them up front last year. That was probably the best defensive game FSU had played in quite a while. And remember that BC made some insane catches in that game just to keep it close. Otherwise, I kind of thought the Noles should have probably been up a little bit more.
Yeah.
That's a big deal, man, to lose all 5 offensive linemen.
Oh, it's a big deal, and it's also tied to what we were talking about at the beginning of the podcast. I made a comment that your first 5 games are going to have a massive impact on perception of coach, perception of program. Games 6 and 7 are NC State and Clemson, games that you're probably going to lose. But games 1 through 5, Duquesne, which we don't really need to talk about, and then the 4 of matter: LSU, Louisville, Boston College, Wake Forest, and yeah, that Boston College game becomes a eminently more winnable occasion without them having their best offensive lineman. And hate it for the kid, but the fact is the fact, and that makes game number 4 a little bit more likely that you end up with a win. So certainly worth pointing out.
You definitely would prefer to, like, if you had to go 7 and 5, right? The 7, like, the most optimal way to do this for recruiting, I think, is you start 7-0 and you finish 0-5. I know that sounds crazy, but I really do think most kids have their decisions sewn up, by Halloween.
Yeah.
And then, you can basically say, hey, like, the reason, like, you saw how hot we started. The reason we didn't finish well is because we didn't have depth. We had some key injuries, blah, 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 blah. Literally the exact opposite of what you did last year is what you want.
Yeah.
I mean, nobody wants to be that streaky, but that would be ideal. I mean, if you did that, you would beat. Well, it's unlikely because that would mean you would have wins over LSU, Louisville, NC State, Florida, or Wake Forest, Boston College, Clemson.
We'll see.
Yeah.
All right, so we'll get into listener questions here. This has gone a little bit longer than we realized, and most of these are pretty green, so we can roll a couple of these over to the next podcast if necessary. We'll thank our friends at Congruity. Matt Lewis, fantastic individual to work with, as we can personally state. Just as we say, there's massive players in this industry, and sometimes it's maybe just easier to check a box. Give these guys 5-10 minutes, explore whether or not they're a good fit for you. I kind of laughingly joked about the fact that I've worked at this new position that I'm in 3 or 4 months, and we've already moved over to Congruity because that's just how it worked out. And they provided us great value. Excited to work with Matt on multiple fronts. The feedback that we've gotten on Matt has been nothing but fantastic from listeners who have decided, whether it be payroll, HR, wherever the fit is. So congruityhr.com is the website, as many people have. If you'd feel more comfortable reaching out to me to put a personal introduction into Matt with you, I'd be more than happy to do so. But great people who we're so fortunate to partner with, and who do their part in making the Nolecast possible and making listener questions like these possible that we're able to answer on a Friday morning. So we'll go to the first question. St. Pete Noel writes, ask, if you are Mike Norvell, what are you doing to try to generate buzz on the recruiting trail right now? Do you push all your NIL resources on 1 or 2 big-time prospects to enhance the current optics of the class? Seems like the only coach carrying on this recruiting trail is Alex Atkins. Currently, FSU is not even on the radar of many top prospects. More importantly, not on the radar with top prospects within their own state, or perhaps even worse, their own city.
There's not much you can do. He missed his window for hype. Part of that was losing games. Part of that was when COVID hit. I mean,
and part of that was not signing the 2 or 3 pieces that could have really sent you into hype overdrive last year. So
right. I mean, obviously, like losing Hunter will have reverbs. There's a reason I asked, are we just playing out the string on National Signing Day? The answer to that, we might look back and say, yeah, we were, basically since December of 21, just playing out the string.
Yeah.
The answer long term is win. But if Mike Norvell succeeds here, I do not think it'll be a super quick turnaround. Right? I think it's just, hey, he's consistently making improvements to the roster, which he is, and the team is getting better year over year, which it is. I mean, it was a lot better last year than it was the year before. I do think this year's team is better than last year's team. I think noticeably so. Can it continue to improve to where all of a sudden kids start to take notice? Rivalry wins can help. But I thought Andrew Ivins and Cooper Patagna said it well the other day. Like, nobody needs the season to get here faster than FSU, recruiting wise.
I really do like the question, though. It's a good one. If you could come to some kind of NIL agreement with a massive piece of the 23 class, that would be nice. And that would be what I would personally prescribe to some of the things. I'd also point out that Odell Haggins continues to be an incredible recruiter, and the fact that guy's, the age that he is and continues to be one of your best pieces is both a testament to him as one of the better position coaches of all time, and a little bit concerning that maybe some of the younger pieces aren't carrying their weight. But I would add him to the list that is performing on the trail right now. Old Blue Chicken, another great name, says, does Florida State moving on from Mike Martin Jr. confirm this administration's confidence in Mike Norvell to be the guy and significantly decrease the probability that he is fired after this upcoming season? You would expect a program that is struggling financially to save every dollar they can if they're preparing to potentially fire their head football coach for the second time in 3 years.
I mean, I feel like we just answered this question in the opening salvo a little bit, right? What's the slant on this that we haven't taken yet? I'm trying to think. You want to crack this one first?
I would just reiterate that I certainly understand the idea of financially saving for a football coach, but the money that's needed to solve the baseball problem and then money that's needed to potentially solve the football problem is like the difference of replacing your kitchen counters or versus buying a new house or something like that. I mean, it's a whole nother proposition. I wouldn't say that, I certainly would not glean any confidence in Mike Norvell to be taken because they fired Mike Martin Jr.
I think that's fair. Yeah. All right. What do we have next here? Albert's question. Hey guys, like the last pod, question for you. If Norvell can go 7-5, is there any chance of an extension? And if so, is there any chance he could revamp this coaching roster? It was mentioned that if things go wrong, this could be his last year. Even if he goes 5-7, is there a chance of blowing up the staff and trying something different? I feel like Dugans obviously would have been fired if he thought this was the last offseason he would have. Well, he did try to replace Ron Dugans last year. I think that's pretty well known. They wanted to get Juwan Sider and did not get it done. He elected to stay at Penn State. If I was Juwan Sider, I would definitely stay at Penn State over coming to Florida State. One coach just got a 10-year extension. The other coach is thought in the industry, at least, of other coaches to be coaching for his job. Would he get an extension at 7-5? I think so. I do. If you keep him around, you need to give him an extension. Now, is it a real extension or is it one of those Jim Harbaugh style extensions where the actual guaranteed money after this year is basically zero? It's very heavy on incentives, and thus it's more of an extension for recruiting purposes and less of an extension that would leave you liable. If Mike Norvell goes 7-5, he does not have leverage against the school. The school has leverage against him. He's going to want an extension for recruiting purposes because you don't want to go into a recruiting season and saying, hey, I'll be here 2 more years for you, right? Like, that's just not going to work. That's why, I don't know that it would actually kill you in recruiting, but all the agents are going to claim that it will. So the school, the response should be what Michigan did and say, yeah, that's fine. We can extend you. We will. And we'll even give you raises in those years because we think you're going to continue to improve, but they're not guaranteed, right? This will be just the amount we had before. The interesting part of this question to me is, would they give him a chance to revamp the staff again if they go 7-5? Point counterpoint. On the one hand, if you're going to keep the guy here, you need to let him make the improvements that he wants to make. I think you probably need to make several changes on the defensive side of the ball, personally. I think the Randy Shannon hire was kind of a Band-Aid on a issue as far as like player relatability and whatnot. And I just don't think that's a great combo over there. On the other hand, to get good coaches in, they're going to come in an uncertain situation that would require multi-year assistant deals, which would then have to be bought out if things don't go better in 23. Are you willing to do that? I don't know. I that's a tough call for Mike Alford, don't you think?
It would be. There's a piece of me that thinks that 7-5 is not necessarily the end of Mike Norvell, and I'm not talking about getting fired. He's not getting fired if they go 7-5, but that there
Definitely
may be a little bit more momentum there that you can sell. We turn 3 into 5, and top 15 classes or something like that, as my computer video cameras spazzing out here. Apologies. I do think that what you would see is exactly what you talked about, is kind of a show contract, more or less, to continue to give you the ability to tell people that you're going to be there. I do think that they would let look 7-5. It's going to matter on the optics, how you got there, etc. But I do think that there'd be a little bit more support for Mike to make changes and continue to try to build this thing up, because he's more or less doing what you hired him to do at that point. Now, we can talk about what your expectation would be for 2023 and what it has to be, but you brought the guy in. I talked about this last time. Your number one want with your consultant was somebody that's going to bring us stability, point the ship in the right direction, and get the ship moving in that direction. And that has occurred. Certainly not in the manner that you've wanted it to, and the ship doesn't have shiny pieces like Travis Hunter on it at this point. That sucks. But I do think that if you saw 7-5, that you'd still have more buy-in from the people that matter than maybe your sidewalk, common run-of-the-mill fan would expect at Florida State after years of winning 3, 5, and 7 games.
I think that makes sense. Okay. You want to take Matt's question?
Yeah, let's do Matt's question here. So what is the range of expected quarterback play in a Mike Norvell offense? He hasn't had the pieces to make the offense what we're told it should be, so we're left wondering. I think of Jimbo at Florida State, and I think the ceiling is being 2023, 2013 Jameis, and really good examples of Ponder and Manuel. I doubt we'll ever see anything like that from Mike Norvell's QBs, but I hope you tell me I'm wrong.
Well, I think it just depends on how long he stays, right? If he continues to build things and they continue to win more games than they did the prior year, and if you're able to recruit off that, then it's certainly possible. I don't really know what the ceiling is. His offenses typically score a lot of points, just wherever he's been. I do think he's a pretty good offensive coach. Ponder, I thought, had a really good year, and so did Jameis. The floor, though, for some of those offenses, passing the ball, that Jimbo had was pretty poor, Now, part of that, I think, is that Jimbo's a pretty good quarterback coach. I think his offenses are like horrendous for receivers. If you look at the rate in which highly rated receivers go to that offense and don't get drafted, it is scary, especially over like the last 10 years. You can only like ride on the whole 2005 LSU offense for so long.
Yeah. I would point out to Matt and all of our listeners that Kevin Little and Adam Brown have a pretty interesting video series going right now over at Noles 247 on some of the complications and intricacies of Mike Norvell's passing game, and that may be something that you find interesting based off your question here. So I think the most recent one is titled "Failure to Launch Play Calling Decisions in the Passing Game," and I would point you in that direction. But I think that'll probably be it for today's show. We got a couple other questions here that I'll store away and we'll hit on first of next week. But enjoyed it as always. Thank you, the listener, for the incredible amount of support that we've been so fortunate to receive. If you give us a 5-star review, or you have time to give us a review or a rating on iTunes, Spotify, wherever it may be. Know that it's wildly appreciated from us, and we'll have something to you next week as we make our way through the summer off season here.
Enjoyed it, buddy.